All right. That was Branch Davidian, Manufactured Illness. And we started off today with that song. I asked Brian if we could because I was asked to announce this show. I know we got listeners from all over the place, but if you're in the New England area and you're a fan of metal or extreme music and you can get to this, we got a show. It's Saturday. I'm reading it off the flyer here because it was just giving it to me today. And I'm playing the show, so I should know it better. But the problem is we've never played this place before. And it is a new flyer, so I just want to make sure I get it all right. It's going to be Saturday, March 22nd at Hillside Johnny's in Norton. $10. The doors are at 12:30. The show starts at 1. This is an afternoon show, so don't forget. Matinee Mayhem. All ages. Awesome. It says all ages on here. 1 p.m., 336 Old Colony Road in Norton, Massachusetts. For bands, Branch Davidian. Again, you just heard it. That's me. Branch Davidian working on a new album right now, which should be out, hopefully in a few months. And again, Medjugorje, that album's about to come out any time now, which is finally going to be a relief to get that out there. But Branch Davidian, oh, how ironic. Fatal Sacrament also playing. Chad Bryan from Fatal Sacrament's going to be our next guest. He likes talking politics. We're going to have him on here. So this is perfect show to be announcing. Ravager. Let's see here. Bastard Curse. Effigy. Far Too Late. Bastard Curse. I'm trying to pronounce it properly. And we got Siberia Zero, the DJ, who's going to be spinning in between bands, who is also part of the Acorn Nar Records family. So they're gonna be there with the table set up. Brown Recluse Entertainment is bringing you the show, and good time to announce too another project that I'm involved in, Hour of Prayer. We're gonna be putting out a little EP. Gonna be recording with Black Cathedral. That's new studio coming out. We'll hear more about that. So we got a lot going on musically here, and this show is part of the metal kind of scene out here in the Bay State. So anyone who's been listening knows that there's kind of like a metal connection, even though it's a political show. All the music we play is metal, and with the bumper music coming in and out, intro music, outro music. So I'm always down to promote the music on here as well. And we will that marriage will take place when we have Chad from Fatal Sacrament on here. Kind of combined them all. So today is finally our post-election and first episode of the new year. Like I've expressed on other episodes, there's no time frame with this show. We could do a show and then do another one a couple weeks later, or we could do one a few months later. One thing I wanted to do when me and him first talked about this show, actually, I think this was Brian's idea too. Brian was always saying, if you got something to say, let me know, and we'll get in here. And we haven't pushed or rushed any episodes. When I'm feeling it, when I have something to say, that's when we do the episode. Even if a couple months have gone by, I think it's made the talks on here way better, way more interesting, and I prefer it this way. And I don't think it takes away from anything. I think it's okay that the election took place. Well, the inauguration was this week, but the election was back in November. I believe when we did the last episode, we did not know yet. So that must have been around October, I would say, was the last episode. So that's a while. Now it's January. Again, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the spreading out of these episodes. I got no problem with it. So, you might be saying, man, the election was back in November. We're already over that. But this is just how we do the show. And there's lots and lots to talk about, regardless of when we finally get in here and talk about the particular topic or whatever the time frame is. So before I continue with this, today's one of those days where it is very important for me to let people know that while me and Brian share a lot of beliefs, I don't speak for him. He doesn't speak for me because I'm gonna say some things today that I don't want people necessarily. I think it's today more than any day is really important. People understand Brian's his own. Even though we work together, he's his own independent person. And some of the things I say today, um, it doesn't necessarily represent his beliefs, or I don't want to drag him into anything because today's probably going to be, I would say, you might wonder how this is even possible, but I think today is going to be one of the more controversial episodes, maybe the most controversial episode. Again, if you've heard other um, installments, you might be saying, "How can that be?" Well, we'll talk. Me in the voting booth, I think very controversial, and I'm going to explain piece by piece what happened. But we've got our own separate ideas as much as we do agree and come together. So anyway, here's how I want to start this off. I have always been very, very honest on this show about how I vote. I've never lied about how I vote. I've been very specific about it, very calculated, very animate about my kind of suspicion about the two-party system. But I've also talked about protest voting. I have talked about the fact that what happens here, and this is a very selfish way to vote, but what happens here in this state is very important to me. Normally, politically, I wouldn't be kind of self-centered, but I think that sometimes, even though you're in your own little box, the way this country works, trends in a particular state can spread and can set an example nationally. So keep that in mind when I tell this story. Oh, by the way, really quick before I start this story about me and what went down on election day, I got a very ironic phone call. Couldn't be more ironic. I had a message before I came in here. I got a phone call from the Center for Disease Control, doing a survey. And what was weird was they left a voicemail and you could call them back, which normally, like survey type companies, you can't do that. You call back and it's an empty phone number. You either answer when they call or you don't get to talk to them. Why is this ironic? You guys know by now, those of you who've been following the show, I have been making many phone calls. Once we hit the 1 year mark, calling people who I feel their views or ideas or actions oppose what I believe or what is said in this show. And one of the places we called, I actually called. It wasn't the Center for Disease Control. It was actually, I want to say the name right. It was the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. That's the one I actually called because that's the one Anthony Fauci worked for. But they do go hand in hand, in my opinion. And I called trying to get anybody on the show. I thought it'd be a good episode. I wanted to challenge, a lot of these regulations and mandates, whatever you want to call them, during the coronavirus, were coming from suggestions of these two organizations. And I wanted to get someone on here that, again, I could debate and challenge and ask them why they made these decisions and why I thought a lot of them were ridiculous. And I understand a lot of times when I make these phone calls or make these requests, it's understandable. A lot of people might think that I'm doing it to be a wise guy or to make them look foolish on here, and it's not. I want to have an intelligent conversation. But of course, a lot of these places don't get back to me. They don't even give the respect of a phone call back or an email back, or I fill out the official form, media people. There's been times I've emailed and talked to media people. I've gotten pretty high up in some of these phone calls, and I would just like at least the respect of some type of phone call or email back, even if they don't want to come on. And I just thought it was ironic that I couldn't get any of these people to call me back or email me back about the show, but yet here's my phone number being given out to whoever, and the Center for Disease Control is calling me for a survey. And the woman calls me, and I asked her, I said, hey, hold on a second. I said, I kind of told her what I just said now on the phone. I've been calling, uh, trying to get someone on the show. I explained I had a podcast up here. And, we just talked for a minute and she took it the wrong way and thought I was harassing her, of course. But just pointing out the irony in the fact that I can't get a call or email back, but yet you can call me on my personal property, do a survey, and right off the bat tell me I'm being recorded. So, again, you got to understand, I get self-conscious about the fact that a lot of people think I'm too over the top or I'm too sensitive or I'm worrying about these little things or these little details that really don't matter. But you got to understand, I'm going to talk about it in this show. It's these little things like that build up and get us to where we are now. And I'm going to talk about that today, about little signs and hints, directions where this country was going back 20, 30 years ago that people didn't pay attention to. And as silly and as trivial as they are, as much as it sounds like I'm whining and complaining and being a baby, those intuitive little, when I got suspicious, these problems that no one really wanted to listen to me and other people like me ended up eventually becoming big problems and becoming mainstream stories. So I just want to point that out, that ironically got the Center for Disease Control calling me wanting to do a survey. But anyway, so election day. Here's what happened. Here's my story of election day and how I voted. Again, I'm not going to get into it. I've said it. Go listen to past episodes. I've always voted for third parties, alternative parties, anything to try to get someone else in on this two-party system. Okay? I've talked about it over and over again. Go back and listen to an old episode. But here's what happened. On the last episode of this show, I spoke about a commercial. You can go back and listen. I had seen a commercial, a very vicious, incredibly earth-shattering anti-abortion commercial that was getting played on network television. Okay? And what happened was, at that moment, I think I had only seen the commercial once. I had seen the very end of it or the second half of it. I believe I had seen it for the first time that day when I came in to record that episode. So I wasn't completely sure what I was seeing. Okay? It ended up, when I further researched and looked into it, and I saw it a bunch more times and then kind of, looked on the internet. The commercial was actually paid for, or it was put on there by the Constitution Party, who I've talked many times before, who I've voted for the Constitution Party, and I've been a supporter of them. And it was a commercial. The guy in the commercial was Randall Terry. Now, Randall Terry, if you're like myself, if you follow the pro or the anti-abortion movement, he's always, he's been a pretty big figure in the anti-abortion movement for a while now. I've been very well aware of him and his protests. And he has changed his hair drastically. And I didn't know it was him. And I came on this show and I said he had Einstein hair, which he does. And I'm not trying to make fun of his hair. It's just that's what it looked like to me. Had no idea it was him when we came in and did this episode. Didn't even realize. Again, I caught this thing so fast and I was in another room. I kind of heard it and I went running in. Didn't know much. So it was Randall Terry who got that commercial on the air. All right. So now I'm talking to you a couple months later. I've been able to piece it all together. So again, just a recap. Randall, these crazy anti-abortion ads that had pictures of fetuses, which I couldn't believe, because I think about how difficult it is just to get images like that up on YouTube or social media. But then suddenly he was, or the Constitution Party was able to get it onto network television, which I couldn't believe. How they pulled that off, I don't know. I understand how they did. I read into the legal route they took, but I guess I don't understand how they're not able, how they've had so much trouble doing it on social media. However, I have noticed that in the last year or so, it has become I shouldn't say they can't do it. They kind of get away with it more now. So whatever social media is doing, the pro-life groups on the internet, maybe, the Constitution Party took that same route. So that might be part of the explanation. But, I was very impressed with that. Very impressed. So, a lot of people might disagree with me and might not like me for it, but, abortion is a big issue for me. We've had guests on here that have worked at abortion clinics and have had some pretty gruesome stories about what they saw behind those doors. And it's something that I think it's it's the modern day human rights issue, in my opinion. And a lot of pro-life people will tell you that. So anyway, I was just adamant that look what this guy did. This is incredible. I'm going to vote for Randall Terry. And what was going to happen is I figured, well, I'm not against write-ins. I've done them before, but I'm seeing these commercials on network television, and I'm figuring I just kind of assumed he was going to be on the ballot. Now, I know there's a criteria for getting on in different states, but to me, and I do understand why there's that criteria, believe it or not. You can't have 55 people on a ballot. I mean, there's got to be some narrowing down, okay? I'm willing to bend on that a little bit. You got to have some type of pool at the top, because if not, you're going to have a million people. What do you have, 5 pages of people to vote for, okay? I think you're telling me there's 2 people.
I was trying to tell you that the peace sign is actually V for victory. But there's only 2 people to
Okay, I thought you were saying 2 people. Well, yeah, there's 2 party. I thought you were referring to the 2-party dominant system. Yes.
I was.
Right, okay. But anyway, so despite that criteria, and I'm going to say this again probably throughout this story, first of all, the Constitution Party is a legitimate party. They've been on ballots before in this state. They've been on ballots before. Well, let me, I'm going to actually save this just so I'm not repeating myself. I'll get to this. I think this is more for afterwards, after I say what happened. So I went in to vote, and a lot of people there standing in line for a while. And, actually stood in line with a mother of, someone who's a friend of this show who y'all know very well. Actually ended up, me and her were in line talking politics the whole way in. And wow, there's a lot of people here. And so, I go in finally to vote. And I was legitimately surprised. He was not on the ballot. Now, again, so now I'm going to say these 2 points. Number one, the Constitution Party has been on the ballot in the state in the past. Number 2, regardless of the criteria, if your party has a commercial that is airing on network television, especially with the content matter, if you are a political party or candidate that managed to get pictures or video of aborted babies played on daytime television, if you pulled that off, whether you think it's appropriate or not, whether or not it's appropriate, that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Regardless, to me, if you pulled that off, and there's been some big names that have run for the Constitution Party in the past. I've talked about them on this show. I'm not going to go over it again. Some big names. To me, you should be on that ballot in every state. I'm making that judgment call. Every state, or whoever's in charge of the elections in every state in this union, knows that is you've done some legitimate legwork. And people should have What more do you have to do to be on? Again, I understand you can't have 35 people on the thing. You can't have 10 pages of people to vote for. I get it. But considering the people that were on the ballot, that he should have been on there. And I look on there, and he wasn't. He wasn't. Now, me and Brian, I've talked to him about this. And what I did was I did a quick on my phone in the booth. I looked. And I was able to quickly look up what states he actually got on the ballot. And sure enough, there was a trend. The states that he did get on were right-leaning. And the left-wing states almost unanimously had him off. I've talked to Brian since, and we did a little bit of research on why he wasn't on some states, why he was on some, wasn't on others. And pretty much in the preliminary research, it seems like it was a case of, the left-wing states didn't want him on. Now, I'm not saying that's the complete story. It's completely fact. I'm saying, based on what I've looked in the map, there's definitely a trend there, without a doubt. And I lost my mind. I do not regularly lose my composure. And I talk about people going out in public, acting like idiots. And this is why we all cannot have nice things. I've called society names. I've mocked the citizens of this country who do not know how to behave, who do not know how to throw a piece of trash in the garbage and not let it fall on the ground. People who do not know how to put a shopping cart back properly after grocery shopping. I've talked about all of that. And here I lost my composure. Luckily, I didn't have a public outburst. I wouldn't do something like that. So I do have some level of self-control. I sat there and I just thought about where I am, where I live in this state. And it's always bothered me, but in this moment, it bothered me like nothing else. I just felt like he's not on the ballot because of where I live. And this guy should have been on. And my views are not legitimate. And it is, if you don't like the two-party system, it is so difficult to vote. And I had a person that I liked that I really wanted to vote for. Now, many of you can say, well, why didn't you just write his name in? I didn't want to write his name in. His name should have been on that ballot. It should have been on there. And I just was so angry. Now, what I did next, I can't believe I'm saying this. And if people in the audience are angry at me, they have the right to do so. If you never want to listen to this show again, you don't have to. And I could lie to you right now, but I'm not. And after episode of priding myself on voting for alternative people, of trying to have a show that thinks outside of the two-party parameter, I did something. I said to myself, I thought of the people here, the politicians, the way the government works in this state, and I just said enough is enough is enough is enough. What is the one thing I can do to send a message to these people to stop doing stuff like this? I can decide whether or not I want to vote for Randall Terry. He's not on that ballot from what I can see because he's a pro-life candidate. He's a major player in the anti-abortion movement, and it probably is the biggest issue on his platform. And he said in interviews, I know I'm not going to win. My goal is not to win. My goal is to make sure Kamala Harris doesn't win. And again, my views on that are separate. When he's out publicly saying that, the people in this state say, well, he can't be on the ballot, or the authority figures in this state. Can't have him. Can't have that happen. Can't take away votes from Kamala. So this is what I did. For the first time in years, I voted for one of the two parties. And I am beside myself. But yeah, I checked next to Donald Trump's name. Now, again, for any of you that know this show, that know me, that is earth-shattering. By the way, if I voted for Joe Biden, it would have been just as earth-shattering. This is not really about like, oh, you voted for Trump. Forget that. It's that I went for one of the two parties. Now, when it comes to abortion, what am I going to do? And this is the dilemma that people are in. What am I supposed to do? Vote for Joe Biden? And again, I sympathize with people. I do. I've said on this show, if someone votes for Joe Biden, I don't hold it against them. When people go, oh, they're liberals, they're this and that, I say it all the time. What do you want them to do? It's a two-party system. What do you want people to do? In general, for the most part, half the voters voted for Biden, half voted for Donald Trump. So millions and millions of people, or your friends, families, neighbors, people you work with, people you love and care about, they either voted for Joe or they voted for Donald. That's the reality, and that's the world we're living in. And I also knew, and I thought about this show and how I would explain this when I voted. I knew that. Part of me is kind of glad that that happened and that I voted that way and that this conversation could happen, that I can show the severity of this in my mind. When a guy is out there getting commercials on network television, daytime, causing a stir, making headlines, and can't get on the ballot in this state. And then when I look at the map, it's, well, big surprise. Look at the states. Look at the states that had him on and the states that didn't. Now, there's another little story here too, a little side story. Before I went to vote, I've told stories about baby boomers that I know. I haven't been too kind to the baby boomers, especially conservative ones, and the way they pick on me sometimes. And the ones in my life, I love them. I'm friends with them. Sometimes it's all in good fun, but it does frustrate me a little bit, and it's worth talking about in this show. One of these people I had a conversation with, and this person does this to me all the time. His friends do it too. Before I went to vote, right before that day, he went on this rampage, very frustrated, as he always does, telling me how I throw my votes away. I'm always wasting it on this alternative party right and stuff. And I said to him, and this is what makes me so angry, and it doesn't matter how many times I say it to this person or his friends or other baby boomers in my life, conservatives. They don't care. They don't want to hear it. But I'm going to say it again on this show. There was a movement that started about 3 decades ago. And I was part of that movement, even though I was very, very young, even though I was in junior high, whatever, 8th grade. The topics that I'm talking about now, the roots of it, the roots of my belief started around 5th grade, maybe earlier. By 8th grade, there are mainstream topics right now in this world, concerns that the voters have, that I was, as an 8th grader, studying and warning people about. Maybe I was ahead of my time. And I remember older people laughing, thinking I was crazy, telling me when I get older, my views will change. Not only did my views not change, but a lot of these older people came over to my side and are now thinking like me. And I've actually gotten apologies from people. I have, a lot, saying, hey, man, you were right. When you were 15, 14, man, I thought you were nuts. You were right. And I don't know what you were on. And I was on nothing because I've been straight edge my whole life. But you know, they can't believe like how I got wise to this stuff. And I explained to him, listen, my man, I will use Ron Paul again as an example. Ron Paul has been for years giving warnings, talking about how the government should run. And a lot, I'm not saying all, but there are remnants of what Ron Paul was saying years ago that is part of Donald Trump's message, that is part of the current conservative movement. So when Ron Paul said it, he was laughed at. Understand, other politicians came along and were laughed at. for saying things that are now mainstream, for saying things that were the reasons now that Donald Trump got in. I want to point this out too. What is amazing to me, I hear people now, we've heard Donald Trump say it. We've heard people, actual people in the military say it now. Whether it's on the news or other kind of podcasts and maybe YouTube channels, it is amazing hearing conservatives, military people, politicians now talking about, people like Dick Cheney literally saying this country has gotten into wars that they shouldn't have gone into, calling people who were in charge warmongers, accusing them of being okay with little babies in other countries getting bombs dropped on them. Let me remind you, there was a time, just want to remind people again, there was a time when if you said this, again, conservatives now who are lining up behind this movement, there is an anti-war conservative movement now that I see. Whether it's honest or not is debatable. Again, separate topic. But on paper, as I mentioned, it's being said verbally. If you made these comments 20 or 30 years ago, at the beginning of this movement, many of the people now who are speaking this same rhetoric got very, very angry at you. How could you say this? If you don't like it, leave the country. That's the one you always get. You could not, you were terrified to criticize foreign policy in this country because you were unpatriotic. The consequences were severe if you spoke out against any decisions war related in this country, especially after September 11th. Now people openly say or make comments about September 11th. They're suspicious about it. You couldn't do that right after September 11th. You just couldn't. And so when people get mad at me, you did this, you did that, you said this, you wasted your vote. The movement I've been part of in the way I speak, what you have right now for Donald Trump, if you're into Donald Trump, and I'm not into him, despite what I did in that voting booth, but if he's your guy and you're into it or you're into the Republicans, I was part of the beginning of that movement, regardless of how young I was. The movement that you see now. And that's not to say I'm a Republican or a conservative. I'm just saying that movement has become a big part of what the Republicans are right now. And I think there are elements of it in the Democrat Party as well, too. So I don't appreciate it when people laugh at me for voting for people like Ron Paul. Or I talked about Donald Trump before he won. There was an episode before, or an instance where he ran in the past. A lot of people don't realize that the first time Donald Trump won, he had run for president before. And he was an outside guy. So your own guy did this too. Like I've said before, the third party, alternate party people, the Bernie Sanders of the world, the Ron Pauls, the Donald Trumps, what they have been doing is masquerading as Republicans and Democrats. I believe that they figured out the only way to do it in this country is Democrat or Republican. So a lot of these people you're voting for at one time, or maybe they still are alternative party people, but they're masquerading, they're just playing the game a little bit. So you got to realize that. So when you insult me, I was part of this movement that you have now. Not trying to sound like a megalomaniac or narcissistic, but I took a lot of grief. A lot of people did for things that we said that was, you just couldn't say it. You would get in trouble for it. Now it's common knowledge. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say too, I, for many years, have tried to help Democrats and liberals, my liberal friends. I have told them, I have given them advice. I've done it on social media. I've done it on whatever platform I've had at the time, where I've said, listen, if you don't take my advice, your party's going to start getting dismantled. You need to do A, B, and C. And none of them listen to me. Instead, they get mad at me. They resist me. They're ticked off at my views. That victory, whether you like Donald Trump or not, He wiped the floor with Kamala Harris, regardless of your beliefs. That was insane what he did. He got the popular vote too. What does that say about your party? Oh, and by the way, there were a couple states, I don't know if it was in New York or New Jersey, these states that are now going Republican. Look at the areas in this state, in Rhode Island, across the country. One of these states might flip in the next election. You people have to go and do a total reanalysis of what you're about. And people like me over the years have tried to work with you, have tried to coexist with you, have tried to give you advice. And you're angry and you're resistant to that advice, and it's costing you. Because I feel Kamala Harris should have won. She had all the pieces. The fact that he beat her like that says something about your party. And as far as all the people that got made fun of for questioning the last election, where did all these millions and millions and millions of Joe Biden votes go? You're telling me that people didn't come out for him? They suddenly disappeared? Okay. We'll put that aside. You understand the implications of that statement. Now, I want to talk about where the country goes now, moving forward. Oh, and by the way, I'm gonna have to practice my Donald Trump impersonation. I don't have the voice down, but I got a lot of the mannerisms. And with Donald Trump, I think the mannerisms go a long way. So in other words, the hand motions and all that stuff. So I can be like, Brian, you're doing great. You're doing great. You know, Brian, I've never met you before. I don't know you. Everyone says I know you. I never met you before, but you're doing great. And nobody, you run the soundboard better than anybody. So if I need, I'll ask you. Yeah, but I love that. I love the nobody loves the environment more than me. Nobody. That stuff cracks me up.
Say I was a government on the verge of collapse.
You want me to say it as Donald Trump?
No, say I was, hypothetically.
Oh, say you were, yeah.
No. What if you made the game so that the pieces are put in place?
Yeah.
So that you can dismantle it and make it look legitimate instead of having it fall apart.
Right. I believe I'm with you on all of that. And like I've said before, Brian, I'm sure that I have no doubt that that's not only is it possible, it's probably more likely.
You were going to say about the future, though.
Yes, about the future. Well, here's one of the places where you and me differ. Unless you haven't already figured it out. I try to, let me give you an example. The other day, people are talking about World War III. They're still talking about World War III. And I left a comment in this thing because I go around sometimes and interact with people. And I said, and I've said it on the show, if you keep saying World War III over and over and over again, I believe you'll wish it into existence. I do believe in groupthink, mass telepathy, positive thinking. I believe in all that stuff. I know things are grim, and I agree with you. And I think there's an entire organization, government, whatever you want to call it, that is running this country that we don't even see. And we don't even know who these people are half the time. I want to be very, very, very optimistic and hope that that doesn't happen.
I'm just going to interject real quick and say,
welcome.
Instead of the idea of World War III, we haven't stopped fighting.
Right.
We haven't stopped blowing shit up.
I agree. And not to mention, can I say quickly, there are conflicts going on all over the world right now that don't even make the news. I think a lot of people lose sight of that. It's never ending.
Name them all you want. We've been in World War III since World War I.
You know what? I've also thought about that too. Like I've often said, like, what defines a war? Because at any moment you could say
they didn't start calling it a world war until the Federal Reserve started naming these things.
Don't you think it would be legitimate if someone wanted to, right after September 11th? Because if you think about it, the first two world wars were set off with a major event, okay? If you wanted, I believe you could have September 11th and everything that happened after that. Mind you, when America, anytime they've gone into the Middle East, there's been other countries helping them. It's not just America. So couldn't you theoretically, if you really wanted to, you could have called that World War III? I believe that. If people wanted to market that as World War III, I think you could have. And it'd still be going on today.
Oh, well,
You
into
know?
the 90s,
Yeah.
before 2001, we were in Kuwait, we
Right.
were in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf War,
Brian, what year were you in the military?
pre-pandemic, right before it.
Okay. Just curious, like in relation, like your timeline in relation to what, like September 11th and what we're talking about.
Way after.
Right. Okay. And you are a bit younger than me too. Like that should be say. So yeah. But I am an optimistic. Like I really want to be the goal. See, Brian, this is the thing. If I wasn't optimistic, I wouldn't have a show. Like if I thought it wasn't worth fighting, I wouldn't. People wouldn't have shows and podcasts like this and YouTube channels and websites. There's got to be some belief that the fight is worth it. And as much as I complain about how slow people are to catch on, I do think people are catching on in a way they never have before. I don't think we're there. I think we got a long, long way to go. But people are getting a little smarter. Would you agree with that? Or what's your analysis on that?
People are getting smarter in a
Okay.
sense that the people who are running the show are getting smarter too.
Yeah.
'Cause government efficiency,
Right.
control of the government is about to be
Right.
handed over to the richest person in the world.
Can I say, because I'm not an Elon Musk fan, and I want to say why.
You need to be.
Oh, I need to be a fan of
You
Elon.
have to be now.
Okay, I get you. What I don't like about him.
Keep in mind also that anything resisting the government from here on out
Yeah.
is also resisting the richest person
Right.
in the world.
This is my issue with Elon. I've got a lot of, so this is where I was going to go next with all this stuff. And like I said, today's about where we go next. Let's start with Elon because I have a lot to say. This is my big issue with him. I have seen where he goes on these rants and he's concerned about technology. He's warning about technology. But yet, he's creating automobiles with no drivers, driverless cars, and brain implants. Where do you think brain implants and driverless cars are going to end up? If you're concerned about technology, he doesn't seem very concerned. Now, I've given other examples of this, of right here in Massachusetts, college kids who are concerned with the authority that the police have or police aggression, but yet are developing the technology that will eventually become robotic police officers. You're concerned about the police, but yet you're creating all this technology that can potentially help the police, build to a point where there's nothing you can even do about it. Likewise, they've got that Stargate thing now, where they're going to put all this money into artificial intelligence. We have been warned there is no adult in this country that has not been warned about us and technology and the responsibility of it. Look at the complaints people have with the internet. But yet we've learned nothing. We're going to go ahead with all of this. What's going to happen when you have robots that are out of control or attack? I know it sounds funny, it sounds science fiction, but if we end up at that point, we're at the point right now where we're willingly saying, yeah, that could happen, but we're going to go forward with this anyway. And I've got an issue with that. Let me tell you what else I noticed. A topic we've talked about a lot on this show, and I find this very, very interesting. Donald Trump is now in a pickle, which I predicted on this show. A major topic. We have talked over and over again. And again, I will preface this by saying, if anyone in law enforcement on any level wants to come in here and have a very friendly, intelligent conversation about this and tell me that I'm wrong, I'm willing to do it. This is not an attack on anybody or their character or their intentions when they take on a certain occupation. But I have said, and what inspired me is all the police that I know who complain about what they're being asked to do, about the trends in the law. They're doing things they're uncomfortable with. And I've said, look, whether you're a police officer or not, One of the functions of the police is to carry out and enforce the law, whether that law is legitimate or not. So if you believe you live in a state which is a communist regime, we are throwing this word communism around all the time. If you believe the laws are illegitimate, that the laws are being used to take your freedom, and this was a lot of Trump's kind of platform. We need to get America back to where it was because we're looking like China. Okay, who enforces that? The police. That is a fact. Here's what I don't get. People get angry about this when I say it. To me, people getting angry about that is no different than a Democrat or a left-leaning person getting angry on the transgender issue. For example, I hear conservatives say, look, a boy's a boy, a girl's a girl. Let me use me as an example. I have said a department store doesn't have to have a transgender bathroom. They're not obligated to. In fact, they don't have to have any bathroom at all. I said on this very show, if they want to have a store that says people with bald heads that weren't able to vote for who they wanted to, so they voted for Donald Trump, are not allowed in the store, there's nothing I can do about it. And that has nothing to do with how I feel about transgender people or how I treat them. Which is, I've never been rude or disrespectful. I've shown everyone love. But yet they get angry and they think that a political belief is related to how someone treats people. Now, this is an accusation the leftist gets all the time, that they get really upset. They start accusing people of being racist. Well, my question is this. When I make these observations about the police, and then people on the right start saying, you don't like the police, you hate them, you're out, you think it's funny when one of them gets killed, which I don't. How is that any different? You accusing me of how I feel about people based on my opinion. How is that any different than a liberal accusing a conservative about how they making accusations about how they treat people based on their views on homosexuality, or transgenderism? How is it any different? So let me say this now, this pickle that I've talked about. Donald Trump has been getting criticism because he freed the people who were in jail for their behavior on January 6th of the year when Biden was elected. And the criticism is, hey, conservatives have asked him this. You're freeing people who were beating up the police or attacking them. This is the pickle. Now, I am not condoning. I saw one of them poor guys, them poor policemen, getting crushed like people were crushing him in a doorway. It was awful. The guy looked terrified. I don't wish that on anybody. I have my opinions on the police, and I've expressed them here. I don't wish that on anybody. That is awful. That shouldn't have happened to that poor guy. But Donald Trump freed all these people. The point I'm trying to make is this. If you believe the election was stolen, I'm not saying it was or it wasn't. I'm saying if you believe that, if you believe that that building, the Capitol building or the White House, is your building, you paid for that building with your tax dollars. If you believe it's a representation of the people, if you believe in all this stuff you read in school about revolution and the Tea Party, throwing the tea over into the water, rebelling against royalty, rebelling against the king. If you buy into all this and you feel something was stolen and the communists are taking over, if you feel that way, no matter how legitimate your grievances may be, the police are the ones who are there to prevent you from reversing that system or taking action to change it, whether the action is violent or peaceful. Look at those abortion protesters. Thrown in jail. Now they've been released. I understand that they were trespassing, blocking doors, whatever it was. I am not arguing against that. I think the issue with a lot of people, just to clarify, is that the punishment was unbelievably severe, and that was to send a message. They should have been given fines for trespassing. That's what should have happened, not the punishment they were given. And maybe you could say that too about the people that were protesting on the day of the inauguration of Joe Biden. So this is the dilemma Donald Trump is in. This dilemma is an example of what I've been talking about. You've got patriotic conservatives who I'm sure a lot of them say, get behind the police. The police are doing their job. But then they go to protest this election, which they felt was faulty. And who's going to stop them? The police. Like I've said, the security forces in this country are the ones who, someone's going to come take your guns. You keep saying they're going to take my guns. Who do you think's going to take them? Elizabeth Warren ain't coming to take your gun. She's going to send the security forces. So again, I'm not saying they deserve to be beat up or crushed in up against a wall like that poor policeman. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just telling you this dilemma, this theme is going to keep coming up again and again and again. And that was I was very interested, very fascinated with that. Because Donald had to kind of go against the police in this situation. Another thing I want to talk about. This is a topic that I'm very, very careful with, and it gets a little weird for me. I've talked a lot about sports on this show and how just the fanfare around sports. I think in New England, the worshiping of athletes is out of control. It's insane. I understand for a lot of people it's fun, it's a hobby, that's fine, but sometimes it's just over the top. Bill Belichick visited my old high school this week. I could not believe how many people came up to me like in a frenzy. Bill Belichick was it. Bill Belichick, right? Because he was recruiting for this college that he's working for now, looking for football players. So I know people who had to mingle with him or who interacted with him. And I don't care. Good for them. Great. I'm not here to polish Bill Belichick's shoes. And I'm sure he's, a good guy. I had nothing against him. It's just not me. However, I've also talked about, I've involved myself in sports, athletics, mostly I guess you would say combat sports. Know a lot of people, well, not a lot, a good amount of people who have made it to high levels in cage fighting, UFC. And the problem is, as much as I've been involved in the sport, and when I say involved, I mean, I train a lot, even to this day. I'm in gyms all the time with people that are getting ready for fights. I've helped a lot of people get ready for fights. I gotta kind of be careful of what I say because I've got some very strong opinions on the world of mixed martial arts and UFC because I feel like it's kind of what other sports do, but on steroids. Dana White now hanging out with Donald Trump. And it's not just Dana White. And again, I actually know quite a few people who know him or have met him. So again, I'm not looking to rattle boats here. I'm not looking to make my life miserable. I'm going to say this as carefully as I can. Not because I'm afraid of people, because I just don't need the misery. When I see people like Kid Rock and Dana White now joining forces with Donald Trump or with his kids or his, this new Republican movement, I find it unbelievably ironic. I've been very critical of the marketing side of the UFC. Very critical. And I put Kid Rock in the same category. Let me explain. What is the conservative movement? What is one of their major issues? The destruction of the family. The destruction of morality. What is Kid Rock about? What has he been about? Look at his music, and he's got the right to do and say whatever he wants. Okay? But this is worth pointing out. He has been part of a movement that during the height of his career, MTV, the Family Values Tour, remember that? I don't think he was on it, but that Family Values Tour was a clearly mocking modern morality. I mean, ironically calling it family values, making fun of that stuff. And Kid Rock, even if he wasn't on that tour, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, he was part of that crowd. I saw a video the other day with him on stage dancing with Limp Bizkit. They were part of a movement that was attacking the moral fabric of the country, which Republicans are so concerned about right now. I've even seen past interviews with Kid Rock. Apparently, saw an article with him the other day. There was some type of Barack Obama event, inauguration, something. He performed at it. I've seen quotes with him saying, no guy should stop a girl from having an abortion, all this stuff. And that's fine. And if he's turned a new leaf, fine. What I don't like is absolutely no acknowledgement whatsoever. Like, I feel there's some explaining that needs to be done. I feel like people know what he represents and no one really questions it. Again, I'm not saying he shouldn't be part of the community. I'm not saying he's not allowed to turn a new leaf, but there is no acknowledgement at all of the fact that this mess you're in, with the way kids behave, with the way little girls behave on the internet, on Snapchat, Kid Rock was part of this media attack that targeted young kids and inspired them to behave like this. Now, let's get on to Dana White. When he took over that organization, I got nervous because up until then I'd been a fan of the UFC. I started watching it. The first UFC I ever actually saw was UFC 5. And I still have the VHS tape that I saw over my friend's house. So that was, I believe it was somewhere around, I think it was like winter 1996, I think. It might have been 95, but it was definitely by 96. So that's how long I've been. And I started training a few months. The first time I went to what now would probably be considered one of the first MMA gyms, maybe in the country, which was in Brockton. Again, started training there probably in June of 96. Was planning to do something after high school. Didn't do a lot of sports in high school because my school was a tough school and it was hard for me to keep up with homework. And so I didn't do a lot other than I played in one band at the time. And then I said, right after high school, I'm going to start training, which I did. But, I got bit by the jiu-jitsu bug watching Hoist Gracie. So right after high school, I kind of moved away from like karate and kickboxing and stuff and started doing jiu-jitsu. And again, the term MMA was kind of new, but now looking back in retrospect, that would, I believe it would be considered an MMA gym now with the place I was going to. So, I was a fan way back. And when Dana White took over, I got a little nervous because I kind of saw the marketing and where he was going with this. And the next thing I know, there's a lot of alcohol commercials, a lot of emphasis on the ring girls. And I remember at that time, the ring girls would end up on Maxim magazine. Now, Maxim magazine, another one of these culture-destroying enterprises. Maxim magazine, the girl is no longer beautiful, pretty, someone you want to marry. Now it's about the girl being hot and sleeping with as many people as you can. And the UFC is kind of joining forces with this. And then you've also got, the flirtation with WWE, which used to be WWF. And now you get MTV involved. WWF combining with MTV. They're all kind of in on it. And now you get the music. That's where the Kid Rock comes in. I believe this moral destruction of the country, the hookup culture, MTV at the beach house. There were entertainment organizations pushing all of this, whether they meant to do it or not. whether it was conscious or not, they were doing it anyway. They flirted with it. And I believe the marketing and the relationships that the UFC made at that time contributed to all of this. The WWE Attitude Era looked a lot like what was going on in the UFC at the time. And then you see combatants going between both organizations. Do you see what I'm getting at? So again, I kind of look at Dana White and I look at the UFC and I say, listen, man, all this stuff you people are upset about when you talk about how your kids are behaving, the destruction of marriage, the sleeping around, the abortions. There was a massive entertainment industry pushing all this. And the organizations that people like Kid Rock and Dana White represent were part of it. And I don't think that should be forgotten. And I don't know how more people don't kind of catch on to this. Another thing, I do feel that, they're talking about drilling and all this stuff now. I'm not a conspiracy global warming theorist. I just don't like the way we treat the earth. It concerns me. Had the conversation again with a friend this morning. He was hanging out on the ice near my neighborhood where I grew up, and just talking about, hey man, do you remember when we were kids? The only criteria was it had to be, cold out and snow on the ground, and we knew that ice was going to be frozen. It's frozen all year long. I am concerned. I think there's definitely been less snowstorms than when I was a kid, and it's depressing. And what happens if we find out that there's some type of clean air, gravity-propelled technology that people have known about for years, and they've been keeping it from us, and that we don't even need oil? How are people going to feel if they find that out? And that all this time we didn't even have to be doing whatever it is we do that potentially destroys the environment. The way I look at the environment is this. Like I've said, whether you agree with global warming or not, why are you throwing your trash on the ground? Like, even if you, I've seen people like, oh, who cares? I throw it on the ground. There's no, the environmentalism, all that, it's all fake. So what? Why would you, the Republicans, the conservatives are the political party of God. If God gave you this earth to take care of, why are you throwing your trash on the ground? Even if you don't believe in global warming, even if you think that it's okay to use oil and gas and all this, why does it justify an oil spill? With animals, oil and all over their fur, destroying the water, destroying the living things. Why is that okay? It's disgusting. I know a lot of people who hunt who are also conservationists. And I think that's where the movement's kind of going now too. I think the environmentalists, whatever it is, I think it's going to be more like you're going to see a conservative version. You're actually going to see that of the environmentalism. Like, in other words, like, okay, we don't believe in global warming, we're going to drill. But you got people that hunt, kind of like Native American type thing, where they respect the animal that they kill, they save everything. I do think, because there's a lot of conservatives out there that are kind of like already like that. So I think that's kind of where it's going. But these are things to watch out for. And, I am optimistic. I always try to be optimistic. Even if Kamala Harris won, I'd try to be optimistic. That's just how I am. Like, getting back to what me and Brian are talking about. If we're doomed and there's no way to change it, then, what's the use of even trying? So, oh, by the way, I'll finish with this last topic. Read a quick article where Donald Trump removed or fired the other day. I saw this. He fired the head of the Transportation Security Administration, which many of you called TSA. I hate the shortening of these. I hate abbreviations because it makes them sound more threatening and important than they really are. That's just me. He fired the head of that organization, removed him. And at the time that I read the article said a reason was not given why, but they thought it was worth bringing up the fact that a lot of privacy advocates have been concerned about the facial recognition. Again, I say this. and this is another topic I've been laughed at about. You get concerned when it's facial recognition. You get concerned when the camera is collecting data on you or catching you running through a red light. But the first 10 years of this, when the camera didn't really have a function other than filming you, and when the cameras were being propped up everywhere, maybe it was to catch crime, catch someone shoplifting, you were okay with that. And there was me saying, you have to stop this now, because there's going to be a point with a camera, there are going to be functions of that camera that are going to go beyond simply filming you. And now here we are, people are getting upset about it. People are concerned about facial recognition. It's too late. You should have spoken up before those cameras were armed with the facial recognition. Now what are you going to do? There are millions and millions and millions of cameras everywhere. How do you convince all the law enforcement, notice I said law enforcement, who put them up everywhere, where do you start getting them to take them down? Where do you even go with that? I'm not saying it's impossible, but now it's so ingrained in the society. It's normalized. You are now in a society that has got cameras everywhere, and every move you make is being filmed. I can film you and follow you, or if I'm in law enforcement and I want to, they can follow you across the country. What is the first thing they say when something goes down? Check the surveillance footage. This is the world you allowed to happen. And the way of thinking was, I've got nothing to hide. I didn't do anything. So why are you concerned about facial recognition? Because it makes you uncomfortable. The camera in the first place should have made you uncomfortable. Cameras where people at stores behind office walls can zoom in on you. You have been watched and zoomed in on, and you don't even know it. It's weird. It's bizarre. If I followed you around with my phone camera, you would have an issue with it. So again, why are you okay with a police department having a feed going all the way down, to their department, and they can watch you? Me and Brian talked about this one time, about cameras being mounted in forests, because admittedly people are fooling around out there. And you can't have anarchy in a world of buffoons, of morons, of people misbehaving. If you want no government, if you want anarchy, and anarchy has a bad connotation to it. Anarchy has this kind of, it doesn't have to be a bad word. Anarchy sounds like mob rule, people rioting. No. Anarchy simply means no government. If you want no government, if you think there's too many police, or you think government's too big, well, it requires responsibility. You can't have no government and then have people be irresponsible. The police are a perfunctory reaction to you not being able to behave. So if you don't want cameras everywhere, you've got to give people a reason to believe that they shouldn't have to mount those cameras and point them at you. And even I acknowledge this. So we got next week. Well, not next week. It's going to be in a few weeks. I got to go look at the date that we have picked. I don't know what it is yet. So hopefully people listen to this episode. And when we come back, again, we got Chad from Fatal Sacrament coming on. I think that's going to be a very interesting episode. And I continue to try to get guests on here that will debate me and oppose me and have a different view. So I'm not dominating, and it's all about my beliefs or the beliefs of the show and the audience, and nobody can get a word in. I'm trying to invite people on here for the debate, but it's not easy. It's not easy. So that's going to be all for today. And spread this around. We are on social media. We've got an email address up now. We're on Instagram. Look up Form Voltron Podcast, Form Voltron Show. Just start spreading this around to people. That's how we built the audience. That's all we got for today. Thank you very much.